I'm here in Squaw Valley, California, home of the 1960 Winter Olympic Games. I love the Olympics, but as a city planner, I'm aware that the costs associated with hosting the Games may not make it worth it for host cities. I'm going to tell you about the trade-offs associated with hosting the Olympics, as well as tell you why I think only 6 cities should host the Olympics in the future: Calgary, Rio, Turin, Cape Town, Sydney, and Pyeongchang.
I'm going to get right to it. Hosting the Olympics is an expensive proposition. Costs vary according to hosts, but even a games on a tight budget like London costs $10 billion, though that's nothing compared to the $44 billion price tag for Beijing's games, or $51 billion for Sochi. Olympic boosters will say the costs are worth it, while skeptics will say the money and effort is better spent directly helping its citizens. Olympic boosters will commonly commission studies that show how the games will be profitable for the city. These studies have been shown to inflate the positive economic impact associated with hosting the games. Boosters will also point to projected job creation. While it is true that constructing new stadiums and transit lines creates new jobs, they're usually temporary, and the projections are often overstated. Organizers of the Atlanta Games in 1996 projected 77,000 new jobs would be created, but a study after the fact found that only a fraction of those jobs actually materialized. Finally, Olympics organizers will point to all the urban infrastructure built for the Games and the positive legacy that leaves behind. There is some truth to this. The Olympics can galvanize local politicians to build that new transit line or redevelop a blighted waterfront. The 1992 Barcelona Summer Olympics is considered the gold standard for leaving an infrastructure and redevelopment legacy. The city completely redid its waterfront, adding 2 miles of beaches. It built a new port, modernized its airport, and built new highways. The success of the Barcelona Olympics rocketed the city to the top of tourists' must-visit lists and became an attractive place to do business as well. There's only a benefit, however, if the project wouldn't have been done without the Olympics coming to town. Clearly, the Olympics served as a positive catalyst in Barcelona, but that's not true for every Olympics host. The Olympics obviously leave cities with new sports infrastructure, but in many cases, cities struggle to find tenants and events to fill the facilities, and the buildings, well, they've seen better days. As many as 21 of the 22 venues used in the Athens Games are now abandoned. Beijing is widely considered to be one of the most impressive and successful games, but its venues are also facing neglect and decay. The iconic Bird's Nest Stadium barely hosts events. Rowing, beach volleyball, and cycling facilities are crumbling. The famous Water Cube Aquatic Center is surviving as a water park and only breaking even due to public subsidies. Even the most recent Olympics in Rio is struggling to find uses for its venues. One of the main Olympic parks there, where venues for aquatics, basketball, and cycling were held, are now abandoned and off-limits to tourists. These sports facilities can also leave a financial legacy, a negative one. It took Montreal 30 years to pay off its $1.5 billion debt it owed to build these facilities. Montreal residents nicknamed the Olympic Stadium the Big O. The negative impacts of the Games have a tendency to impact low-income people the most. When Mexico City hosted the 1968 Games, many Mexicans didn't think it was a good idea to spend money on the Games when there are so many severe social problems like poverty and housing that could have used government funds. Prior to the event, violence erupted between students protesting the Games and units from the police and army. About 250 students were killed. Citizens, especially low-income citizens, can be affected in another way. While some host cities have redeveloped brownfields or vacant sites, others have evicted residents and converted the land into facilities for the Games. One estimate puts the number of displaced people due to the Olympics at 2 million over the past 20 years, with the Beijing Games responsible for an estimated 1.5 million forcible evictions. Clearly, the Olympics are not an easy event to host, to say the least, and cities have begun to realize it. The bidding for the 2022 Winter Games began with Oslo, Stockholm, Lviv, Krakow, Beijing, and Almaty. Krakow bailed after citizens canceled the bid via a public referendum. Lviv, Ukraine bailed in large part due to the political strife in that country. Stockholm's bid failed due to a lack of political support. Of the 3 remaining cities, the IOC clearly preferred Oslo, but that city bailed after the Norwegian government discouraged the bid. In the end, the IOC had to choose between 2 less than stellar options. Some great cities didn't even formally bid in the first place due to the outrageous costs associated with hosting, like previous hosts St. Moritz and Munich.
Cities are already considering whether or not they want to host the 2026 Winter Olympic Games, including Denver, Calgary, Salt Lake City, Sapporo, and Squaw Valley. The IOC said that it's learned from past games and will make it easier and cheaper to host. They're even willing to kick in some money to make it cheaper. But still, host cities will probably need to pony up at least $1 billion to host the Games.
Okay, I hope I've convinced you that hosting the Olympics is a risky investment for any city. But what if hosting wasn't a one-time thing? There are proposals out there to have one permanent host city that would get the honor every time. That definitely solves the investment problem, right? That chosen city would get a lot of use out of those venues. But part of the charm of the Olympics is that it highlights different cities and cultures. Choosing only one host city would also make the Olympics very close for a few and very far away for many. I think that the best solution would be to have one permanent host city on each continent. Sorry, Antarctica. 3 continents would rotate hosting the Winter Games, and 3 continents would rotate hosting the Summer Games. That way, each Olympic city would host every 12 years, and people on each continent would have a nearby city to travel to. To minimize additional investment in these host cities, I think that they should all be previous host cities that have some infrastructure already in place. South America and Australia have never hosted Winter Games, and Africa has never hosted. These 3 continents will host the Summer Games. North America, Europe, and Asia will host the Winter Games. And let's start with the Winter Games. Here are the host cities that have hosted Winter Games. How should we narrow down the options? The most important thing Winter Olympic hosts need is snow. And with climate change, many of these cities could not host the Games well into the future.
A study of this topic eliminated nearly half of previous host cities, including Squaw Valley. There's snow here now, but the odds of a snow-free Olympics is just too high.
In North America, Lake Placid, Salt Lake City, and Calgary are all previous host cities that would still receive enough snow to host the Games through at least 2070. All 3 have significant Winter Olympics infrastructure in place, but I chose Calgary because it's probably more feasible geopolitically to have Canada be a host instead of the United States. If the US had a host city, Russia and China would certainly want one as well. In Europe, there are actually quite a few cities that would have enough snow to continue hosting. You'll notice that Sochi is not on that list. If you remember from 2014, the organizers of those games had to stash snow from the previous winter just to have enough for the games. I chose one of the most recent hosts, Turin. Turin is also a fairly large city, especially compared to other small cities that have previously hosted. Moving on to Asia. Beijing will host in 2022, Pyeongchang is hosting now, and Sapporo and Nagano have hosted previously. All 4 will have enough snow through 2070. I'm going with Pyeongchang because I want to avoid China, Russia, and the United States, and Pyeongchang definitely has the facilities ready to go right now. The planning ahead of the games has gone smoothly, and all the venues are within 30 minutes, making it one of the most compact games in a long time. So those are your Winter Olympic cities. Moving on to the Summer Games. Rio is the only city in South America that has hosted the games, and it hosted recently. The sports facilities are already suffering from a lack of use and maintenance, so becoming a permanent host would help revitalize them. 2 cities in Australia have hosted, Melbourne in 1956 and Sydney in 2000. Sydney's facilities are still ready to go, and that Olympics was widely considered successful, and that's my choice for Australia. This leaves Africa. No African city has ever hosted a Games. Only 2 have even bid for the chance to host. Alexandria, Egypt bid for the 1916 and 1936 Games and was beaten out by Berlin both times. Weird. Cape Town, South Africa is the other city to bid when they did so for the 2004 Games, losing out to Athens. South Africa hosted the 2010 World Cup, suggesting that it's able to host a huge event, the first in Africa as well. I chose Cape Town for this reason.
So there you have it. Calgary, Rio, Turin, Cape Town, Sydney, and Pyeongchang. I think this solution minimizes the impact on host cities while still allowing the Olympics to be a global movement with different Olympics on each continent. But this solution respects host cities. Until I started researching this video, I didn't realize the Olympics were hosted a couple hours from my house. Before the Olympics, Squaw Valley was a tiny, unincorporated community, and all of the facilities for the Olympics were built beforehand. Today it's just a popular Tahoe ski resort.